Welcome to the February class of Making the Most of Your Die Cutting Machines here at 2peasinabucket.com. This month's focus is on the Quickutz Epic Six die cutting machine. This is what the Epic Six looks like. This is not an electronic die cutter. It's a manual die cutting machine, and it's lightweight and portable, as you can see here. It has a 6-inch wide opening, which means it can accept pretty much all brands of dies out there. So this is the cutting platform. It's the light gray platform. It's 12 inches long and 6 inches wide. Also, the machine comes with this dark gray platform, and this is the embossing or cutting platform, depending on what dies you use. It also comes with a 12-inch cutting mat. Mine's a little bit beat up. Still works good though. And then depending on what package you buy, if you buy the Epic Six with the letterpress, or you can buy the letterpress separately. We're not going to go over the letterpress this month. That will be later in the year. But that's what the platform looks like for that. Okay, the dies that you can use with your Epic Six die cutting machine, of course you can use the original 2x2 Quickutz dies. These are just some alphabet dies. These work in your Epic Six. It will also accept all the 4x4 dies. So these worked with the Revolution. These also work with the Epic Six. It also will accept the 4x8 alphabet die sets, or dies I should say. And then it will also cut your 12-inch border dies. Like there's a film strip here and a scallop. It will cut those. And it will accept your cookie cutter dies. So here's an example of a frame cookie cutter die, or here are like some leaves. Guess I don't have to open that, but it will accept all of these, or alphabet cookie cutter dies, things like that. So those are the Quickutz dies that the machine will cut. To cut the 12-inch border dies from Quickutz, you're going to want to take your light gray cutting platform, and then you will lay your 12-inch border with the cutting portion facing up, and then you'll lay your paper face down on top of the die. This is white cardstock, so it's kind of hard to see, but I laid the texture side face down. Then you will layer your cutting mat on top of that, and then you will run that sandwich through your Epic Six die cutting machine. And you'll just push it in until you feel some resistance, and then you crank the handle and run the platform all the way through the machine. Then once it's gone all the way through the machine, you'll just lift it up, and I'm going to pop out the centers of that frame, and there is the die cut. And here's just another example that I'm using on the sample layout for this class. This is a scalloped border, and I'm just going to use this American Crafts letterbox paper. I'm going to lay it face down on top of my die, place the cutting mat on top of that, and run it right through the machine. Again, you'll just kind of push it in until you feel some resistance, and then you will crank the handle and push the platform crank the platform all the way through to get your die cut. And here's what it looks like. It pops right off there. Nice big scallop. The next thing I'm going to show you is cutting Quickutz cookie cutter dies. For the sample layout, I'm using this. It looks like one of those Polaroid frames, so you can make a frame for your photos. The opening, to place something behind it, I usually print my photos at 3¼ square, or if you're going to do journaling or something like that, that will fit behind the opening of the frame. So again, I laid the cookie cutter face up, laid the paper face down on top of that, and put the cutting mat on top, and I'm running it through the machine, just cranking it through. And I'm going to do this several times, but it gives me a perfect photo frame every time. This is especially fun. There's some digital kits that have frames that look sort of like this in the two-piece store, but if you're not a digital person, these are really fast and fun. This is one of those dies that you can get a lot of use out of. I'm a real big fan of the kind of generic kind of dies that you can use over and over and over again. So there's what it'll look like with my photo behind it. Here's how you die cut the Quickutz 4x4 dies. This is some branches that I'm going to use as embellishment on my page, and I'm going to lay that face up on the light gray cutting platform, lay my brown cardstock face down or the texture side down, and lay the cutting mat on top of that, and then again run it right through the Epic Six. And then I will simply just pop those branches out of the paper. So there you can see what they look like. And they're a little intricate, and they did cut all the way through, just kind of have to be careful pulling them out so I don't rip them, because they're a little, parts of those branches are a little delicate. And there's what they look like. I'm only going to use one, so I'll have some extras for some other project. Die cutting with the Quickutz 2x2 dies is the same as before. These are a couple of my favorites. This is the 4x4 photo corner die, which is another one of my basic favorites that you can use over and over again. Love these. I use them all the time. For my page, I'm going to use the 2x2 die, photo corner die. And this is how you'll cut these. Again, you're using the light gray platform. You'll lay the die face up, lay your paper face down, or your cardstock texture side down on top of that, and layer the cutting mat on top. And it slid a little bit, so I'm going to fix that. It normally doesn't slide too much, but my cutting mat is a little bit warped, so sometimes I have a little trouble with that. I need to get a new cutting mat probably. So I'll just crank that through, and I'm going to need 4 of those, so I'm going to do that 4 times. The next example I'm going to share is die cutting through the Quickutz 4x12 chipboard. It won't cut through just any chipboard, but these dies will cut through the chipboard made specifically for Quickutz dies. So I layered my paper on one side of the double-sided adhesive chipboard, my pattern paper, and then I'm going to die cut through all of that. And I did leave a piece of paper underneath my die. You can see I'm having to crank a little bit harder. It creates what they call a shim, which helps just cut through the material a little bit better. You have to go slower, and you certainly don't want to push something through that won't go. But here you can see what that little bird looks like all cut out. So you have to be a little more careful and maybe roll it back and forth a couple times before removing it from the cutting platform. Okay, cutting other brands of dies. If you use the embossing and cutting platform, the dark gray platform, you can cut Cuttlebug dies as well as Sizzix dies, or spellbinders, things like that. So here I'm just going to show how to cut a Cuttlebug heart die cut just out of some paper. I'm not using this specific die for the class sample, but I wanted to show you how this machine will cut your other brands of dies. So laying the die face up, your paper face down just like before, you'll layer your cutting mat on top of that. Oops, slid right out. Again with my cutting mat, I need a new cutting mat. You just push it in the machine till you feel resistance, and then just crank the handle and turn it all the way through. Very easy. And this, I'm not showing the Sizzix or the Spellbinders, but they do work the same way, and I have used both of them with the Epic Six. It'll work just like this Cuttlebug die, and you can see it cut it out perfectly. So that's a really fun alternative if you have other brands of dies and want one machine, manual machine that will cut them all. This one will do it for you. Here I'm just going to cut some red felt using one of the Cuttlebug dies for my layout. And there you can see it cut right through the first time. You can also cut steel rule dies with the Epic Six. You will need 2 cutting mats instead of just the one. So it will require an extra cutting mat. Here I'm just going to show an example of using a Sizzix steel rule die. You'll place the die on a cutting platform, face up, place your paper, or in this case felt, right on top, place another cutting mat on top and roll it through your machine. And I'm just showing it does cut through the felt. You can also cut through thin chipboard and obviously paper and things like that. So with the steel rule dies, it gives you a few more options of thicker things you can cut through. Back to Quickutz products, they have a whole bunch of embossing folders. And the first embossing folders we're going to talk about are the A2 embossing folders. And they're A2 because they will fit the front of a card. So here are the Retro Squares embossing folder. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to take this Hero Arts note card and open it up. And I want to emboss the front of the card. And this is one of the card samples for this class. So I'm just going to line that up on the front of my card so I kind of get it centered. And then I'm going to take the dark gray platform. It's the embossing platform. You can see there I've got it all lined up. Lay that on my embossing platform. Lay the cutting mat on top, the clear mat, and then I will simply roll it through the machine. Very simple, very easy. Just gonna get it through the machine there real quick. And a great way to just add some easy texture to any project you might be working on. And then there's what the front of that card looks like. It's a really fun one. And that's how all of those work. You can also use Cuttlebug embossing folders. I know lots of you have those, so do I. So real quick, I'm just going to show you, I have this little square of cardstock. I'm going to place it in the Cuttlebug embossing folder. Same steps as before. Lay the embossing folder with the paper on the dark gray embossing cutting platform. Lay the cutting mat on top of that and roll it through the machine. And you will end up with a nice embossed piece. So again, another reason this is a great machine, it accepts your 12-inch dies, your embossing folders from anywhere. Sizzix embossing folders will work in here too, and also takes your steel rule dies and dies from other companies. Just a great all-around machine. And there's what that looks like. To use the Quickutz 12-inch embossing folders, I am just taking a sheet of craft cardstock here, and I'm going to be using the embossing and cutting platform, the dark gray platform. I'm going to lay that down. I am going to just place my piece of paper in the embossing folder, kind of line it up where I want it there so that it embosses straight. And this is the houndstooth border. Again, very versatile, can be used with a lot of things. I'm a really big fan of the kind of more, I guess I would say, generic type dies and embossing folders, things that I can use over and over again. Then you'll place your cutting mat on top of that, And again, push it through till you feel resistance, and then crank it through to emboss the image. And it'll kind of bounce along, I guess I would say. Just, you kind of have to hold the machine still, just as it goes over that raised image as it embosses. So I'm going to pull that out of my machine, and there is my embossed border. Really easy. Okay, now we're ready. I'm just going to share some ideas for how to distress your die cuts with some distress ink. This is super easy, one of my favorite things to do. The die cuts, the frames were really white, and I was wanting a more aged look, so I'm taking this old paper distress ink and the Ranger ink blending tool, and I'm just working on my craft mat so that I don't get ink anywhere, and I'm just going to rub that ink on, and just going to keep working it until I get the coverage that I want. And it's kind of hard to tell in the video, but this ink really does give an old paper feel to your die cuts. So I'm taking this bright white die cut and giving it this aged look. It's one of my favorite things to do. So I'm just going to keep working that ink in. I'm going to speed this up a little bit so you don't have to watch the whole thing. It will take a little bit of work, and I'm going to go over it several times. Once I have it covered with the ink, I decided I needed it to be just a little more distressed. You could take a distressing tool or whatever. I'm just going to use my fingernails to roll up those edges a little bit and scrape the edge of the paper just to give it a little more character. Roughing it up will be easier when you add the ink will kind of take hold of those places and be darker. So I'm just rolling those up a little bit, and then I'm going to add a little bit more ink to those, and then the corners will be darker. You can see I'm just using my fingernail to scrape along the edge there, scrape along the sides a few places, just rough it up. And then I'll add more ink. And just for a contrast, here's one of those frames that I haven't inked yet, so you can see how it really does give that nice aged look. I've aged these photo frames as well, these instant photo frames, and now I'm just going to add a little bit of stamping, and I'm going to show you how I added that dot border that you see here. It doesn't go clear off the edges, but it is a longer border stamp from American Crafts. And what I did was I just took some of those like sticky notes, and I'm going to mask off the area that I don't want stamped. So I did that on both sides. And then I'm just using this dot border from American Crafts Sentiment stamp set. And here's my acrylic block, and I'm just going to ink that up with some red ink. And then I will line it up in between my little post-it notes and stamp. And you can see that any of the additional stamp went on that post-it note. Peel off my post-it mask, and I have a perfectly stamped frame. The last thing I'm going to show today is that you could make your own stickers. In this case, I'm going to make alphabet stickers, but you could make stickers from really any of the dies by using adhesive vinyl. This is the silhouette vinyl, and this is just like an extra piece of brown fuzzy vinyl I had laying around. I took the Blossom 2x2 alphabet dies, laid them face up on the light gray platform, laid the vinyl face down, then laid my cutting mat over it, and I'm going to run it through my machine, and I will end up with my own alphabet stickers. This work, I really like doing this with like the 4x8 alphabets because you can get a whole bunch of letters with just one pass through the machine. But this is just a great way to make your own alphabet stickers and maybe, you know, not run out of that letter E or whatever letter that you run out of a lot. You can just make more if you need to. So this is kind of one of my favorite things to do, to create my own alphabet stickers. I'm just going to add those for the title there on my layout. And that's it. Thanks for watching.